Welcome to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, with Northampton erstwhile Poet Laureate Rich Michelson, who has with him and us today a very special guest. I'm so thrilled to have this guest back on the show. Rich Michelson, the honor of this introduction is yours.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank you, Buzz. Let's start here with John F. Kennedy. So John F. Kennedy said, "If more politicians knew poetry and more poets knew politics, I am convinced the world would be a little better place in which to live." And we have with us today somebody who exemplifies that quote, Madeleine May Kunin, the first woman to be elected governor of Vermont, the first Jewish person to be elected governor of Vermont. She served the first governor to be elected 3 terms. She was the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Education, and started writing poetry after her terms were over. She has 4 previous books: Living a Political Life, The New Feminist Agenda, Defining the Next Revolution for Women, Work and Family, Coming of Age, My Journey to the 80s, and now as you enter the 90s, we have a new book called Walk With Me. Madeleine, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about I forgot the most important thing. You went to UMass. So you're
And the second most important thing, I think there's a book reading coming up.
And she has a book reading coming up. We're going to talk about that in a second at the Brattleboro Literary Festival in Vermont, just over the border. Madeleine will be reading on Sunday, the 15th at 11 a.m. Again, that's in Brattleboro, downtown Brattleboro. Look at the Brattleboro Literary Festival website for Sunday at 11 a.m. There are over 60 writers during the festival. We'll talk about that in a moment. Madeleine is reading with a Western Massachusetts writer by the name of Richard Michelson. And we look forward erstwhile poet laureate, and we look forward to reading together. So, Madeleine, let's start and talk about your poetry. When did you start writing poetry?
Well, I dipped into poetry rather modestly when I was younger, but I became a real poet, I believe, as I got older. And I was interested in writing about what it felt like to be older and what changes were occurring within me, both mentally and physically. And I didn't know whether I was a real poet until I was listed as a finalist for a poetry contest put on by independent bookstores in New England. So I thought, if they see me as a poet, I must be one.
How old were you when you got that listing?
Well, I was in my late 70s.
In your late 70s. And this is your second book of poetry.
Yes.
I should say that, yes, you're a real poet, that's for sure. The work is searing. The attention to language is just very detailed. And you take on subjects besides aging. You're looking at the world around you as clear as can be. You talk about your childhood coming to this country. It's quite moving. I'd like to start with a poem so people can hear your voice and poetry, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. I think we'll have time for a few poems. But can we start with Kaddish?
Oh, okay. I have to find it in my book. Sorry.
Page
Kaddish
8.
is probably my most emotional poem.
Well... That's how we start out here at Northampton Poetry Radio. We amp up the emotion. So I think it's page 8 in your book.
Yes, I have it. Kaddish. My father died when I was 2.5, some 85 years ago. I work hard to picture him alive so I can mourn him on the anniversary of his death and recite Kaddish according to law. Photographs, some brown, some black, are the only leavings of his life. Small snatches that I try to sew together into a garment that fits his elegant pose. He was a miser with memories and with his love for me. If he had really loved me, would he have killed himself by sliding over the side of a rowboat and letting himself slip into the blue waters of Lake Zurich? Was it sunny on that July day? So I like to think that the lake sparkled, that the first gulps of water tasted fine. Something in his tortured, quenching his tortured thirst. When did the water turn black? When was he retching for air? When did his feet scream? That's my darkest poem.
Well, that is such a powerful poem, Madeleine May Kunin. I just was involved with a film festival where we screened another Vermont poet, Ruth Stone's film, and her husband committed suicide, and she wrote a similar poem that was just so gripping. Did you know Ruth Stone, the Vermont poet?
I just met her briefly. I didn't know her well.
She died at 94, and her work is just so moving to me. And
I think there are definite connections there. I think Vermonters are plain spoken.
I guess so.
I think that's it. And it's really your language in this poem is really searing. And as you say, it's very emotional. We'll talk a little bit about the rest of the book in a moment, and I'm sorry if I started you off in what is a very emotional place. But I'm wondering if the poetry is, in a sense, a reaction to the political language that you spoke for so many years, when you had to confine yourself. You wrote your own speeches, and did you feel you wanted to let more of yourself into that life, or is it a totally different way of looking at the world?
I think it's a different way of looking at the world, though there are, as you note, some connections, but as a politician, I had to be defined by what I said and what I did, and I had to be careful what I said, because any mistake would be publicized and held against me. As a poet, I'm more of an internal person, and I try to delve into what I was feeling and how to express it. So there's some connection, but it's mostly, the irony is that writing poetry is a private process while you're writing it. But then when you give a talk, you're making what was private public. So sometimes I'm wondering if I should be doing that, if I should just keep it private. But people seem to respond to it, that they find something in common in their own lives with what I'm writing. And of course, that's very gratifying, because even though you write privately, you want to be understood publicly, at least to some extent. So that's why I'm doing these book talks, not only to sell books, you don't get rich selling books as a poet.
Welcome to the world of poetry.
I'm sure you can verify that.
Yeah.
But it's still good to be understood. Any artist still wants to be understood.
You are listening to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, on Talk the Talk, WHMP. My guest is Madeleine May Kunin, former three-term governor of Vermont, now poet, who will be reading Sunday, the 15th of October in Brattleboro at the Brattleboro Literary Festival. She will be reading with the poet Rich Michelson, me, and very much looking forward to it. I hope you all can join us. We will be right back in a moment and talk a little bit more to Madeleine Kunin.
You're listening to Talk the Talk with Bill Newman and Buzz Eisenberg.
Last summer, Wayland Insurance finally did what a lot of insurance agencies around New England had done long ago. We partnered with a call center to handle routine things like a change of address. It went okay, but we're not going to continue. We found out that no matter how simple or complicated the matter at hand, you prefer to talk to us. As one longtime Wayland Insurance client told me, the people at the call center are great, but they're not Amy. I like knowing I can call and talk to Amy every time. I guess I should have known. Local people and local service are what sets Wayland Insurance apart from those big 1-800 insurance companies. When you want a quote, when you need help with a claim, or anything else, just call. Or come to our office on King Street. Talk to Amy, or Kelly, or Mindy, or Valerie, or Lori. We tried the call center, you tried the call center, and we found out that you prefer talking to us. Wayland Insurance. Local people, local service, local insurance. Call 586-1000.
Reading is one of life's great pleasures. Having a community bookstore makes it even better. Broadside Bookshop is a community-minded, woman-owned, independent bookstore in downtown Northampton, where you can browse to your heart's content. For book lovers, Broadside is home away from home. You can order virtually any book on the Broadside website and pick it up at the store or have it sent to your door. Do you love books? You'll love Broadside Bookshop.
The Paul Parent Garden Club, every Sunday, 6 to 8 a.m. Brought to you by Weinzick Nursery, locally owned and operated since 1954. Visit Mike, Amity, John, and the rest of the team at Weinzick Nursery, Route 9 in Hadley, and online at WeinzickNursery.com.
Jay Burnham here, voice of the Massachusetts Minutemen.
Touchdown, Massachusetts!
I just wanted to let you know that all of the UMass football action can be heard right here on our new flagship home for Massachusetts football.
Here we go!
It's WHMP.
You're listening to Talk the Talk with Bill Newman and Buzz Eisenberg. WHMP.
We continue NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, with erstwhile Poet Laureate Rich Michelson, who has with him today a very special guest. They are reading together the former governor of Vermont, Madeleine Kunin, and Rich Michelson will be reading together. When and where and what will you be reading from, Rich?
We are reading this coming Sunday, October 15th, at Brattleboro Literary Festival at 11 o'clock. There will be 3 days, actually, of readings by poets, novelists, memoirists, over 60 authors, including some other Western Massachusetts authors. Tracy Kidder will be reading, Kelly Link, Holly Black, and many other of your favorite artists, Allegra Goodman, Andre Debussy III. It is an incredible festival. Come up all day. There are events. Madeleine and myself will be reading again on Sunday, October 15th at 11 o'clock. She will be reading from her new book, Walk With Me. I will be reading from my new book, Sleeping as Fast as I Can. And I think we'll make a good pair, and I hope you can all come out and join us. Bill, did you have a question for Madeleine?
I did. Governor, you were politically involved for decades. You were the governor for 3 terms. You had an extraordinary political career. What I'd like to understand more and better is what poetry brought to your life as a politician, as a public official, as a public figure, and whether it was an entree to a different world or whether it was escapism in some ways. And I'd appreciate your thoughts about that.
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think the poetry was always in me, but I didn't have time or inclination to let it emerge from me and get into written form on paper. So I think being literate and having a respect for words, the things you do as a writer, is very important in politics. So the more you ask me this question, the more I think about it. I think there is a connection between poetry and politics, but you sort of suppress that because poetry takes time. Politics, you almost always react instantaneously to what is going on. You can't say, I'm going to go in a room and think to myself what I think of this issue. You have to have an answer. And poetry, you can play with words. You can take your time with words. So I wrote my own speeches. I did my own press most of the time. I would get talking points, but from the talking points, I would craft a speech. And as time went on, I didn't even have to do that. I could just speak spontaneously, which is what I do now. So I'm glad the poetry side of me has been released.
Governor, did you read poetry prior to your beginning to write it, or were those coterminous kind of events in your life, the reading and the writing of poetry?
Well, I like to read poetry, and I guess the coterminous, as you said.
So I'd like to give the audience another part of your work. I think that we'd like to hear it. Much of this book is about aging and your awareness of the changes in your body. It's also about finding new love at a late part in your life. So I'm wondering if you can read the first poem in the last section of your book, My Body. It's a short poem on page 77.
What page is it?
Page 77.
Okay. Sorry to take the time, but I'm getting to 77. Sorry for the delay.
And
okay, I've got it. It's a nice short poem.
Yes.
My body surprises me, wearing out here, rejuvenated there. I am alive, more alive than I thought. Depends on where I look. I mean, that's one thing you're very conscious of as you age, how your body changes.
Yes.
And then, if you're lucky, you can still walk and give speeches and exercise.
And give poetry readings.
Don't do enough of.
And one more short poem. Turn to page 87, and then we'll talk a little bit more while we have a chance. Page 87 is A New Love in Old Age. And I think you really, again, are coming, you're really letting us into your life.
This is a real private poem. But what the heck, I guess.
It's out there now, Governor.
It's in the book, so I have to follow through. A new love in old age. How can this be? I am young, open to him, surprised at myself, saying yes, yes, like Molly Bloom, wearing hyacinths in my hair. Yeah, that's a poem I had doubts about including
It's beautiful. My guest is Madeleine May Kunin, former governor of Vermont. Madeleine will be reading at the Brattleboro Literary Festival on Sunday, October 15th at 11 a.m. And before I go, one more question. How did it feel beating Bernie Sanders in the governor's race the first time?
Well, Bernie and I go way back, and what is interesting, he campaigned on the same themes that he is enunciating now, so many years later, but it turned into a three-way race when he ran against me for my second term, and I can just say it was not the most comfortable position to be in.
Well, thank you, Madeleine, for joining us today. And you are an inspiration to us all. A new book coming out at age 90, I believe. We look forward to hearing you, to seeing you this Sunday at the 15th at the Brattleboro Literary Festival. It's wonderful you're an inspiration. It's wonderful to see this new chapter in your life. Thank you so much for joining us today on Northampton Poetry Radio.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for convincing us that Rich Michelson is really a young man.
Okay.
We appreciate it, Governor.
See you on Sunday.
And thank you, Rich Michelson, for bringing Governor Madeleine Kunin with us and to us today.
She is inspirational.
When I think of you sometime, and I want to spend some time with you, just the two of us.